Hello and welcome back to Assorted Beefs, where I talk about anything I want to that doesn't fit into niche tea for any particular reason. Here's a live George tax because he's trying to attack something. I don't know. No, stop it. Stop it. Yes, I know. This isn't so much a specific situation as more of a phenomenon I feel like I'm seeing on TikTok. I'm seeing a lot of discussion around the general topic of Gen Z versus Booktok. Most specifically, I saw two videos that went very viral from young men. One was 16, one was 22, and both of them were basically like, Booktok has gone too far, like it needs to be stopped. You guys are too obsessed with this type of explicit material. And there was a lot of frustration expressed in the comments that agreed with what these guys were saying. A summary of the key points these guys made included that, one, it's all encompassing. You can't get away from explicit content. Why can't I just go onto Booktok and find regular book discussion? Do you guys read anything else? Is this a problem for you? That type of thing. Two had to do with the content specifically surrounding the explicit material, the types of tropes or the types of being explored in the material itself they see as problematic. The 16-year-old specifically called out borderline SA, very, very large age gaps, and BDSM. Third was that this material, due to Booktok getting very into it, is being marketed in a much heavier way, and it's not clear. So like if somebody came off the streets into a Barnes & Noble and saw a recommended by Booktok display, which there are lots of, they would not realize that this is pretty much all explicit in nature. This then leads into the fourth point, which is that minors are now being put in the path of this and being basically promoted explicit content. And then finally, just a general disdain for the language use around it, like spice level, etc. Though that seems to also be tied into, it's not just that it's, cringy and annoying language being used, but also just the prevalence of it, the inescapability of that language, which again ties into point one about how all-encompassing this particular part of Booktok seems to be. Most of the people stitching and responding to them were millennial women, and they had some general themes around the response. The first being just a basic defense of their love of this type of content. It doesn't harm anyone, and it's something they truly enjoy. The second bringing up the point that most people engage with explicit content in some way, as post-puberty teenagers through adulthood, and to specifically call out written explicit content as problematic in nature is misogynistic in practice, because women are far, far more likely to engage with written explicit content over video forms of explicit content, which are made by men for men for the most part, whereas written is predominantly made by women for women. And then both of these guys made follow-up videos basically saying like, where I'm being completely lambasted by this whole group of adult women because they're mad about what I said and they're misinterpreting what I said, and basically kind of doubling down on what they think the problematic aspects are specifically of Booktok. I'll be honest, this particular situation is something I could talk about for hours because of the amount of nuance that's involved in the dynamics between these two groups. But to spare everyone that particular experience and in the interest of time, here's what comes to mind for me as I think about how each group is approaching this. The context that I think Gen Z is predominantly missing is a huge part of basically why millennials are the way they are, which is a combination of the current life stage that they're in and how they were raised. Millennials were raised by boomers who had a very strict and simplified view of like what's good and what you should do and how you should act. And millennials' older siblings, Gen X, were also raised by boomers, but predominantly before the internet became commonplace. Every generation looks to counterculture the generation that raised it. For Gen X, because they didn't have the internet, the way that they resisted the boomer influence was to become apathetic, to become above it, to become very independent, and just basically be very go with the flow. We can handle anything, we don't really care, we're doing our own thing, and we're not emotionally attached. By the time millennials were coming up, globalization had really, really picked up, and people were able to find community in things and new experiences that Gen X had very little comparative access to. So millennials found a lot of joy in new things that no one had really experienced in their immediate communities beforehand. Something as simple as anime, which was very much on the fringes up until millennials came into, middle school and high school, became very quickly a bigger thing that people were able to really center their interests around. This created way more division between millennials and Gen X and boomers who had their own stuff, going on, but like stayed very much within their existing community around them instead of going out and looking for communities that align to their interests. So boomers and Gen X were both very like, why can't you just be fucking normal all the time, to millennials? And that's been a huge part of the millennial experience. And then it didn't really get any better as millennials got older, because that's when the whole generational wealth divide started to really pick up. Millennials then tried to get into the workforce and be adults the way people expected. And what you're seeing now is the second wave of coming into our own that a lot of millennials are going through as adults who realize, wait, I can literally just do whatever I want. And so millennials are clinging to things that they didn't feel like they had the ability to cling to in a free and ownable way when they were kids. That's why you have Disney adults. That's why you have such intense Harry Potter adults. Anime, K-pop, all that shit. It's all related to that, and it's why you have so many more older people who are still into it and haven't written it off as like for younger kids, because they're like, we don't agree with that mentality anymore. Then in 2020, when millennials got on TikTok in mass, this happened again, but with people going through now their like late 20s through early 40s, they're going through their first like adult shift in life. This is when people go through having kids, first divorces, and people are finding community in a new way on TikTok that even goes beyond the natural ways they used to on the internet. And so you're finding a lot of really interesting communities spark up here. Yard work catches me filming every time, I swear. This is how you get things like I'm deconstructing my religion TikTok, I'm going no contact with my family as an adult TikTok. To Gen Z, these things have become normalized as they become adults, literally within the last 5 years. But for millennials, this is a big deal. And traditionally for women, as they hit their middle ages, re-exploring their sexuality through usually print is a thing that has always happened and is happening much, much more and much more in an accepted way on TikTok. Moms have always been into this stuff. They just haven't had a place to talk about it where they didn't feel ashamed. And Booktok gives them that. And yeah, the cringy terminology that you already hate is going to carry into Booktok the same way it carries everywhere else. Plus you add TikTok guidelines on top of that, it's going to happen. What it seems to me is that Gen Z is frustrated by the fact that they're like, why is just Booktok equal to all of this stuff? And really it's just that this particular genre of people got to Booktok first and became like synonymous with Booktok. It doesn't mean that Booktok isn't very diverse and doesn't have a bunch of other stuff going on. It's just a higher concentration of people who specifically want this type of content are on just regular hashtag Booktok and not like spicy Booktok or explicit Booktok or whatever. And I can definitely see that being frustrating when you're trying to find a non-explicit type of recommendation, but it doesn't mean that there's something problematic going on. It just means that this is where these people hang out. And so a lot of the conversation surrounds this particular niche. It doesn't mean that's the only thing that they're reading. It means that when they want that type of thing, they come to TikTok and they go other places to look for different types of books. It doesn't mean anyone has an addiction or needs help or anything. As far as the specific call outs of like different types of tropes like borderline SA, age gap, BDSM, these are quite literally just, and you either are comfortable with them or not. That is a personal thing for you to deal with. And if you're not comfortable with them, that's fine, but that doesn't make it not okay for other people to engage with them. And print is the safest possible way for a lot of people to engage with these things. And as far as especially age gap, I want to remind people that most of the people reading these are women who are older, but are putting themselves in the younger primarily protagonist position. So when you talk about an age gap, there's a totally different thing to imagine being with an 18-year-old and imagine being an 18-year-old with an older person. Same thing with the borderline SA. They're putting themselves in the victim role of this. And so it is a exploration. The lack of warning for like, especially a Barnes and Noble and places like that, where they just say recommended by Booktok with no other context, 1000%. They should not do that. Everyone should know what they're getting themselves into. And then lastly, when it comes to minors, they traditionally, post-puberty minors, are going to seek out, find, and engage with explicit content. And print is the absolute safest way for them to do so. Again, everyone should be fully informed, but I don't think that it is valuable or healthy to tell teenagers that they can't read explicit content if they're actively searching for it. To millennials, I'll say this: Gen Z is not your parents. They sound like boomers when they do these things, and it's very triggering and it can be very upsetting because it takes us back to a place where we remember being put down our whole lives. But they don't have that context. They're quite literally just counterculturing us. It is our job as the adults in the room to take what they say with a grain of salt, even if it's an area for them to vent and like get out their frustrations with the things that we do. It's going to happen. It's something we have to sit comfortably with and not be very emotionally reactive to. Generally, I agree with the sentiment that if you're a minor and you don't want to be engaged with on this platform, then you should not come looking for smoke and you will not get any. However, it is our responsibility to remember that in a lot of cases, we're dealing with literal children who are in the process of growing up. They're going to have very black and white opinions on things that is very common. So did we. And it is our job to manage our triggers and either ignore and disregard and understand that, you know, who this is that you're talking to and does this really affect our lives, etc., or approach them in good faith with a goal of helping to give them additional context with the understanding that they may flat resist it because that's what you do at that age. Anyway, thank you if you got this far. I told you I could talk about this for hours. I find this stuff really, really interesting.